location at the Raven site. One of the most wonderful sites that you're going to find that's active, and we call this a revisit. I want to introduce you to Mr. James Conkle, Director of Raven site.
James, nice to see you again. Nice to have you back again this year.
We appreciate it, and we're looking forward to seeing and hearing the things that you're doing here.
Well, there's a lot of activity today. We have a group of elder hostels. I have an elder hostel program. They're up there excavating in the north. Mike has a team here in the South Pueblo. They're on just about on floor of a room, or half on floor now. We have a lot of different programs. We have programs for kids and really anyone with an interest in archaeology that wants to come up and work with the archaeologist and get their hands dirty and work in the labs a little bit and on the site. You can come up for a day or multiple days or a week or however long you like, and we have programs to accommodate that. Well, and it's always good to see you again. It's always good to show you around.
It's always a pleasure being here. How do they contact you? Which is the best way to contact you?
Well, the best thing is just to call. Really, we have information out there that you might find a brochure in your travels, but you can write for information or you can call. The number now, they've changed the area codes out here again, so it's 520-333-5857. You can call and get program information. We'll send you a packet of information. And like I said, we take ages. I've had kids up here as young as 7, 8 years old, and a lot of families come up with the kids and work on the hill with us and in the labs. You can camp on the site or bring your RV. We do have overnight facilities. They're rather limited, but we do have them. And we've got a great chow hall down there too, so the food's good.
You bet. I vouch for that. Thanks for having us.
Well, it's nice to see you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, Mike is they're excavating. This is room number what, Mike? This is 78. Room 78 here in the South Pueblo. Lots of features to talk about in this room. We have a little vent. So we because of the vents here, we know there's a fire box in here someplace. They vented cool air into the fire. And it was a bit of a mystery because where the vent is located, we expected the hearth to be right in front of the vent with a deflector slab. And we're finding a series of features over here in the west end of the room that is probably the firebox, maybe a little table in front, possibly a mealing bin. We're just starting to profile into it. Mike's just starting to find what is apparently the firebox. He's on floor. Now this is the floor of the room. These floors were very highly polished caliche. They'd bring in this nice caliche clay and lay the clay in and then polish it. In the South Pueblo, it's real easy to know where the floor is. You'll be excavating down and you'll find that very polished caliche and you know it's the floor. In the North Pueblo, it's a little harder because they had dirt floors, and sometimes you have to almost go through the floor to discover that level. And Mike's taking a few notes on his features. He's just measured and mapped these in, gets depth measurement. And until they take this, normally we'll leave a profile. You'll excavate down and leave this cube of material that I'm sitting on, because what happens is it'll demonstrate the lenses in the room.
You see it right here. See this right here?
Here, Mike, take this so you can. There you go.
I'll use this to point. You can see the lens of the roof right here as the soil color changes. There's a charcoal layer right here, and then the whitish gray is a caliche clay layer of the roof, and there's also a reddish clay layer. And if you follow it, you can kind of see how the roof collapsed. If you look down in that direction there, you can see how it tails into the side of the room. And once we're finished with this whole series of grids, we'll cut that, clean it up, and take a photo of that as well. Also here you can see a corrugated pot bust that is actually going into the other grid, and we unfortunately won't be able to take that out until we drop down in the other grid.
It's probably just another little mono. You can never tell if they're just a little hand mono or if they're a shaft abrader or what they are until you flip them over. And of course you can't flip them over until you take the picture of them.
And mono means hand.
Yeah, in Spanish it just basically means hand tool. Mono, there's some nice monos over there on the east wall in the shadows there. Those are called beaver tail monos. They're basically used for grinding corn, grinding different grains on the metates. You haven't found a metate in here yet, have you?
Yeah, there's a broken one right over there.
You did find one broken one?
Up on the roof.
Very often the metates and the mortars will have pigments or the grain still in them. You can tell what they were grinding. This room, it's a little confusing about the dates in these rooms. The pottery indicates that these rooms were late in the 14th century, although we suspect they're even later than that. We just got some obsidian dates back from the room next door, which raised more questions than they answered. The obsidian dates, we discovered that when you date a piece of obsidian, it depends on which surface you date. One surface may have been flaked AD 200, and the other surface may have been flaked in AD 1350 because they kept these core stones around. So it's a little confusing. The only solution to that is to date a finished point. We don't like to do that, though, because they have to cut the point with a diamond saw and cut it up to do that. So we don't like to wreck the points. We don't have to. I think we're going to have to go to that, though, in the south here to confirm these dates. We expected dates into the 15th century, and we found our dates are only going to about the late 14th century. So the pottery indicates it's a little later than that. So it's a little confusing down here. That's one of the things we want to do is confirm when this South Pueblo was built. We thought it was built, well, certainly after 1350, and we thought it was occupied certainly as late as 1450. Our dates are indicating that it was occupied maybe only until 1400. And that kind of annoys me because I'd like to find a site that was occupied after 1400. In the literature, there's sort of this ceiling of 1400 that they always use, and we'd like to find something a little later. Most archaeologists, they like to find the oldest stuff. They want to find the oldest stuff. We're looking for some of the later stuff. We want to find some of the historic contact pueblos. So Raven Site's a good candidate for that, but that hasn't been confirmed by our dating yet, unfortunately. We're in another section of the South Pueblo. This section of rooms was built certainly after 1350, and it was a planned community. They had an influx of people. The Salado Indians moved in up here with the White Mountain people that were living here already, and they accommodated this influx of population by building the South Pueblo. And it's a very much a planned community. They planned the room blocks. They said we're going to lay it out just this way and just this eastern room block and a western room block surrounding the plaza. They started building this way right around 1350, and that's about the time the Kachina cult developed in the Southwest. And they built this way so they could get up on the rooftops and view the Kachina ceremonies down in the plaza. You can see that most of the masonry is very similar. It's all stacked travertine. Most of the rooms are about 3 meters square, almost to the centimeter. We have some mealing bins here. This is the grinding stones that they ground the corn. They ground more than just corn, though. They ground beans and amaranth and other seeds. They had quite a variety of crops. And the little vents that vent the fireplaces. These doorways, a lot of people say they're awfully small for doorways. They must have been shorter people. Well, they were a little shorter, but they weren't that much shorter. You see 5'2", 5'4", occasionally even see a 6-footer. But they just built these little doorways because they're more economical. They keep the heat in better. They keep the cool in the summer. I worked with the Mayan Indians down in the Yucatan for a few years, and they still build little doorways like that. I used to cuss every time I'd hit my head on one going through. These mealing bins, you see, these are real ones. This is the floor of the room, and the bin, the little stone bin, holds the grain in. When you're grinding the grain, it falls off the matot, and you can scoop it back on with a little broken part of a bowl or a scoop. And they actually had coarse, medium, and fine all in a row here. The original ones. The little box in the bottom of the room there, that's the fire hearth. We keep all of the hearths intact that we can, because you can get a date from the hearth. And you can date from a process called archaeomagnetic dating, and you can tell when the hearth was last fired. So we try to keep all of the hearths intact that we can. We can date most of the rooms at Raven Site with the ceramics pretty accurately, but here in the south we have a little trouble with that because there's not good dates associated with the ceramics here that we're finding in the south. So that's new stuff. When we get good dates to go with them, we'll know what that pottery dates to. What'd you find over there, Mike?
He came unglued.
Yes, they got excited about something.
Mike,
What you got?
Bring it over and show what we just found since we mentioned we just left.
That's the one we just flipped over? That's the one I was just talking about? You can't tell what they are till you turn them over?
This is how it was, and you can see how smooth it is on the bottom side. So we thought this was a little round hand model. Okay, we took our measurements, photographed it. At that point, we can then finally take it out. And when we lifted it out,
Oh, it's a
it was
beauty.
actually a nice little small mortar.
Beautiful.
Now we'll
And this
leave.
will get bagged up. We won't pull the dirt out. Okay, we won't wash it, and also the dirt that was mounded underneath that will be scooped out and taken down as a sample in a nice clean plastic bag.
Sometimes you can float that out and tell what they were grinding.
Wow.
That's a nice one, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
It's a beauty. If that had been scooped and thrown, it'd be out further in the room. I think that is in situ in the room in some context, maybe from a roof fall or something.
That's what it does.
Yeah. So that's a good indication. That indicates that this west side of this room may be in situ, even though the east may be disturbed. That's what you do with these rooms that have been kind of chewed up by the looters and the early looting that went on here. You know, you might have one area that's just trashed, but then the other, you might have half of the room that's still pristine. So we try to glean the information out that still exists. This is looking good. You guys are doing a great job. I've got a pyramid to build when you're done with this. Let's check a screen here while we're here. Let's figure out which way the wind's going so I can get...
Well, not too much wind right now.
Yeah, better than yesterday. That's why I wanted to come up this morning.
This has been very unproductive, the last 6 buckets.
Really?
Besides a few little rodent bones, nothing.
Yeah, it's about time you say that, then you find something.
That's
So
what
that's
I'm
it's like when you're deep sea fishing. You want to catch a fish, light a cigarette, then you catch a
I don't
fish.
expect to find something that was built 1,000 years ago or so.
Oh, you'd be
on the
surprised. You'd be
surface.
surprised in this North Pueblo, though. It can happen just about the time you think it's not gonna. It'll happen. The South Pueblo, they got to get right down to a floor level before you find anything. But up here in the north, boy, it can be anywhere.
I found
This is a little building we recreated from the information from the architecture from the South Pueblo. We recreated one of the rooms. And we learned really a great deal when we did this. All of this was mixed by hand. And we did this exactly the way that the prehistoric Indians built their rooms. And we discovered very quickly why they did different things. You may have noticed a lot of sandstone slabs over in Mike's room. Lots of sandstone slabs. We find these up on the roof all the time, all these sandstone slabs. A lot of them aren't worked or cut, and they weren't grinding slabs, and we could never figure out what they were for. Well, when we built this little recreation, we found out real quick what they were for. The roof is flat, and it's very much a working surface. The rooftops are like street level. Well, the rooftops are made out of clay. You put riparian material down, then you put a clay layer, and they are absolutely watertight. It's amazing how well they work to keep the rain out. But when it rains, that clay, it gets like gumbo. It gets real sticky and gooey up there, and they put all these sandstone slabs around to walk on. They're little stepping stones up on the roof. Another thing that happened, we very rarely find, in fact, I don't think we've ever found an exterior door. In other words, a door that leads actually outside. If you see a doorway, it leads into another room. The way you enter these rooms, of course, is through the rooftop ladder. Well, we put a door in because we have tourists come up and we wanted the tourists to be able to enter the room and go through the room and then exit out the other side. And you can see we've sealed this up since we did that. Well, we found out why they didn't put exterior doors in, because this wind from the west blows right through the room and blows sparks all over from the fire, and it's just a real pain. So we sealed it up. We also find sealed doorways like this, so it's still authentic even though we sealed it up. Little glyph over the door. We find these in the South Pueblo very frequently. Many cultures today still do this. They'll have a little blessing when you enter the house or leave the house, and this is what this little shaman's doing. He gives you a little blessing when you enter or leave. And we find these in the South Pueblo very frequently. Little gutter systems too. These, we don't find these intact, of course, because the rooftops have all fallen in the ruin. But from the early photos of Zuni Pueblo by Curtis and others, we see these little gutter systems. And prehistorically, there'd probably be a nice big pot here to catch the water. And this just channels the water off the rooftops. The rooms are very, very cozy little rooms. In fact, a lot of our staff here at Raven Site, they fight about who gets to sleep up here because they're really comfortable. And we'll go inside in just a second. I'll show you. We have the fires burning, the skins on the walls, and you can really get the feel of what these little what the Pueblos were like in AD 1350. Okay, we're inside now. You can see they had an earthen floor. Actually, the floors prehistorically were a little nicer than this. This gets so much traffic, it gets powdered up. But they had a very nice polished, almost like a cement floor. Walls are plastered and often painted. You can see the hearth, little hearth box. Mike's just excavating one now in the South Pueblo. And they'd often set this deflector slab up. And here's the vent, lets the cool air in. And they work very efficiently. They build a little, almost looks like a little well outside to let the cool air in. And then the deflector slab, and then the fire. Behind me, there's a little niche in the wall. And it's almost like a little shrine. You have a little shrine in your home. We find these painted tabletas. We found several on the ruin. And this is where you have your little prayer sticks and different things. These crystals, we often find crystals on the site. Very often they're very worn and polished from handling. What they would do is when the sunlight comes into the room, they would refract the sunlight through the crystal and make the prism, which is basically a representation of the rainbow, which is a little, well, it's basically you pray for the rains to come, and you do this little rainbow recreation. The rainbow is also a pathway or highway in the sky that the deities use, particularly the warrior twins, use to travel. The Milky Way is also, the starry sky is also. We find these crystals quite often. Get a shot of the ceiling. This herringbone ceiling is very typical. What they would do is they put in the beams, lotillas. These beams they'd have to bring down from the mountains about 20 miles away. And you can imagine carrying one of these for 20 miles. So good wood was used and reused throughout the site. Lotillas are fairly local. You can get these. And then they put the willow in, or repair-in material, and then mud on top of that. This is a herringbone pattern. They used a lot of different styles, so pretty much anything goes on ceilings. Some sort of matting or grass, and then the mud. And there again, rooftop is very much an activity area. These rooms are very dark. You'll know that if you spend a few evenings up here. We haven't found any evidence of any kind of candle or torches or anything, but they had the hearth for light only. So the rooftops up on top, that's where you do a lot of your activity. You're grinding corn, making pottery, that kind of thing. It's almost like a street level up there, rooftop to rooftop. And some rooms, if they have a hearth, you know they had a roof entrance because you got to let the smoke out. If you have a room without a hearth, it may not have had a rooftop. It may or may not have had a rooftop entrance. So it's kind of harder to tell. If you find a ventilator, you're pretty sure it had a hearth at one time. Many times you'll find a room that had a ventilator, had a hearth, and then they would seal up the ventilator and the hearth is gone. So they've converted that room into maybe a storage room or something other than living space. Okay, this is the ceramic lab. This is where, after all of the other material, after the fallen material and the lithic material and the floral material, after that analysis is done, all of the ceramic, and there are something like 83 different types of ceramic from Raven Site, which indicates one of three possibilities. Either very, very long occupation of the site, great temporal depth, which we have at Raven. It was occupied certainly from AD 1000 through about 1400. Or it was a big trade center, which we've discovered, yes, it was a big trade center. They were making pottery to trade out, and that's why we have so many different kinds. Another possibility is that someone prehistorically was collecting prehistoric pottery, but we're not sure if that's the case or not. What happens in here, the material comes in by provenience. This is all from room 4. It's sorted, the corrugated material is sorted out, the cooking vessels are sorted out, the black on reds are sorted out, and you work on one type of pottery at a time, and you begin this giant jigsaw puzzle. And it's basically a jigsaw puzzle by attrition. What you do is if it has outside paint and no inside paint, well, it's got to be a jar. If it has inside paint and or outside paint, then it's got to be a bowl. And you sort bowls from jars, and you sort small jars from big jars. You sort ladles or dippers from the other material, etc., etc. And you just keep sorting it out, and by pattern. These little curly swirlies, these are typical of about, it's Tularosa black on white. was made around 12 to 1300 AD. And you just keep sorting them and sorting them and sorting them. And then what happens is, very slowly, you begin to find the pieces of the puzzle. And you have to compare. You rarely find a vessel just sitting there in situ in a room. Usually it's splattered all over the place. It's either splattered within the room, or it might even be splattered from one room to another. Material is up on the rooftops, and these roofs caved in. A lot of the material might have been from a trash bin, so it might be splattered even more widely than that. So what we do is we compare every piece ever found on the site to every other piece ever found on the site. It's sort of like taking, 250,000 jigsaw puzzles with 5,000 pieces each and mixing them all together, burying them for 1,000 years, digging them up, washing them off, and trying to put all the puzzles back together at the same time with no picture. It can be done. It just takes a very, very long time. What we do is, after we've analyzed this provenience and glued everything together that we can from this provenience, then we compare this material to the other material from the site. And very, very slowly, I'll run around and get one here, the pieces come together over a period of years. We've been chasing this thing for about 10 years. And every year we find a piece or two more of it. And we're doing this with thousands of vessels at the same time. This is a big, this is called a dirty glue up. And you see there's glue on the edges and things. We don't worry about that too much because everything we do in here is reversible. In other words, we can take this apart and start over again. All of the lab work with all of the artifacts. You don't want to change anything too much. You want to have it so you can restore it, but you can also convert it back to the condition it was in. So everything we use, all of the debonding agents and the stabilization process on all this material is reversible. You might even notice a lot of these pieces aren't really that clean. We leave them a little dirty. If you clean them too much, you might be washing away some evidence that might teach you something later on. So we leave them a little bit dirty. I imagine in about 5 more years this will be in good condition. This is a St. John's polychrome, an early St. John's polychrome. This was made about AD 1175. And they find this stuff, this was a very desirable trade ware. They find this stuff as far east as Ohio. This was traded very widely. And it was produced here at Ravensite. It's a nice big bowl. We'll have a group of people in here this afternoon working in this lab, doing some of this this particular puzzle. It just takes a very, very long time. Dippers are fun too. Let me get a ladle. Now let's see. There's one. You'll see more of these in the museum, but I learned quite a lot from the form. This is a big dipper. Had a big bowl here and a handle out of ceramic. This is for dipping water, dipping stew. We find these all the way from little soup spoon size all the way up to great big baby Huey dippers. You can tell if a person was right or left-handed if you have the whole dipper. Because right-handed people wear out the left side, and left-handed people wear out the right side. Unless you're Emily Post and you dip like this, but nobody does that, so you don't have to worry about it. The other thing is the handles of these, very often, you see they're hollow inside, and they have to do that so they don't explode in the firing. But the handles very often have a rattle in them. And if you read the literature, it'll say that that's whimsical or ceremonial. And as a researcher, you learn real quick that if you hear those words, ceremonial or whimsical, it means that the person researching the thing didn't know what it was for. It's sort of a taxonomical black hole. Anyway, they put the rattle in the handle. It may have been so that the dipper makes noise when you're using it. Remember, women made the pottery. And the lady of the household might have put that little noisemaker in there so she could tell who was dipping into the stew at 3 in the morning. Might have been a little alarm on the dipper. Back up. See, they all get their little provenience, and we'll find the rest of this. It might be 10, 20 years from now, but we'll find the rest of this dipper. They're very easy to isolate because they're very small curvature on the inside paint, so you can tell a dipper from a bowl, usually, pretty easily. Let's back up. I'm kind of eager to start working on this. We're going to have the team in here this afternoon because I haven't seen this material worked up, and it's exciting because you never know what's going to come out of it. You start the process, and you might find nothing complete in the entire room. It might just have been a trash bin, and all these might have been broken, and this attempt might be rather frustrating. But it'll match. What'll happen is we'll find maybe 20 or 30 pieces of this funny little squiggle design, this little water design, and from this group then you run over to the wall or the shelves, and you may find another bag of material from a room next door that this matches. Then you take both bags, put them together, and if you find a match, well, then you have to pull all of the other room, whatever convenience it is, room 8 or whatever, and compare it to room 4. And this just goes on and on and on and on. But eventually they come together and they form nice pieces. And you can learn quite a lot more from the whole vessel than you can from just the sherds.
You had mentioned this was a, oh, excuse me.
Is it-
No, that's fine. You had mentioned that was a watermark. I know you have the ability to understand some of the writing.
Well, let's see.
Could you say just a word or two on that?
I was just looking for another one in here, see if we could find another one. According to the modern Hopi and Zuni, this circle with the squiggles in here is a water or still pond symbol. I've got a much better one in the museum. This one is also this little squiggle. Not always, though. It depends on the context. Most of what I'm seeing here in front of me, these are nice stripes, polka dots, plaids, and paisleys. These are the ceramic traditions that were handed down mother to daughter, and the meaning, well, they might have a meaning. Only when we see this in context in something that is a vignette or a story or a legend or a myth, then do we say, okay, that does mean water. Now, it may mean water even when it's a nice filler pattern, but I don't see anything. This one may be in context by the time we get the rest of the vessel. We don't see a lot of meaningful symbolism on ceramics. We see it here at Ravensite from about AD 1325 to about AD 1400. We start seeing meaningful symbols used in meaningful ways in context on the vessels. But most of it isn't. Most of it's just nice stripes and polka dots. There are certain ceramic types in the Southwest that we see a little more of it. Here at Ravensite, we're tickled to have that little time period that we can study with the symbols. We've identified about 12, maybe 20 symbols on the ceramics that are meaningful. But the real question is, if we have 12 or 20, how many did they really have? You have to remember this: they had basketry and weaving, they grew cotton, they had paintings and things that didn't preserve. Ceramic preserves, it's fired and it survives the ravages of time. If we're seeing 12 to 20 symbols on just ceramics during this one little temporal period that are identifiable and are meaningful, how many did they really have in total, in their total cultural index? And it probably was several hundred meaningful symbols. It's unfortunate that more doesn't preserve for us to study. We're just tickled we have them on the ceramics here. This one may be still water. There's a better one in the museum. We get in the museum, I'll point out some other ones. Oops, that goes over here. Okay. Yeah, the 73. Several things in here, really. Big Tonto jar. These are kind of tough to date. The dating is kind of all over the place, but certainly 13th century, late 13th century. There's been some recent work done on these. Patricia Crown just came out with a really good book on this, and she's talking about the images on the outside of these bowls and jars on these Tonto polychromes, the Salado wares, basically. And there's a lot of serpents, a lot of snake imagery, and the vessels are very big communal vessels. She's actually theorizing that there was a cult, a religious cult, a serpent worship cult that developed in the late 1300s in association with these Tonto polychromes. And we found one last year, a great big community bowl with the serpents. It looks like somebody read her book, then made the pot. That's what it looks like, because it's just perfect. It's got the snakes on it, the twin snakes, and it's got a kill hole and spirit break and the whole thing. So room 73 here, well, we get to lay this out in the lab later on today, and it has some good Tonto polys. It also has, which I love, the 4 miles. These are the ones with the symbols, from Ravensite anyway, for sure. They're very rarely symmetrical. They almost always have some sort of iconography going on that we can talk about. And there's a nice big piece of this, and it looks like from that break, notice that, PJ, that may be in there, because these, when the room fell, that broke off. I don't know about this side, but these other pieces will be here. We'll match that up. So we'll get to lay this room out today later on. I want to go in the museum, though, and I'll show you a few that we have put back together with the symbols on them. We'll show you those. Yeah, this is some of the vessels we put back together that have meaningful symbols on them, particularly the Thunderbird with the village below in the background. That was the one that started the whole analysis of these symbols. It shows a Thunderbird bringing rain to the village, to the crops. And of course, rain here in the Southwest, particularly this year, is quite a concern. And prehistorically, if you didn't get the rains, you'd have to move to an area that had better rains. And the prehistoric peoples did move around quite a lot. And when we found that vessel, we started looking for different symbols on the pots with meaning, and we found really quite a few. The turkey, the butterfly, all of these have places in the mythology of the Pueblo peoples. The butterfly is a fertility symbol. It's the flight of the spirits. The turkey is center. Turkeys had really quite a few uses. They were used in sacrifice. When you build a new building, you sacrifice a turkey, bury it in the floor. But we've done several books on the symbols on the pots. Thunderstorm, there are a lot of rain symbols, falling rain, rainfall into the earth. We also have all the pottery making tools. That proves it was a good production center here. They were making all the polychrome pots. We saw the little mortar up on the site that Mike found, and here's some of them with the pigments still in them. The red pigments, the hematite, the iron, that's when you get the black paint and the red paint. And then limonite's the yellow, and the turquoise powder, and then kaolin is an aluminum-based mineral. All these are just from the earth. They just knew what they were doing. In fact, many of the pots that we find prehistorically, modern ceramicists have a dickens of a time trying to reproduce them. They can't get the colors as good as they did prehistorically. We find all the little bone tools and different things. They made the incisions on the pot, on the ceramic process, scrapers, and even some of the misfirings. I enjoy this from the process. This vessel B here, has slumped, which means it was overfired, and it slumped when they were firing. It's kind of a mistake that they did. We also have all of the different types and the developments of all the types. You start from right around AD 1000, and it goes all the way up to about 1400. And you can see all of the changes in the stylistics that they did. Looking at pottery, if you know your pottery, it's a lot like knowing your cars. If you know your automobiles and the development of the automobile from the turn of the century to now, you can recognize a Model A and know it came from the 30s or late 20s. You can recognize a 57 Chevy, and just by looking at it. And the same with pottery. If you know your pottery, you can tell when it was made just by the stylistics on the pot. And that's what we have here. We have the whole developmental sequence from the black on reds all the way up through the elaborate polychromes. And you see these changes, how they developed. There's another interesting thing. These they look like plates.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
That's what they were.
What these are, they didn't really make plates, and very rarely, once in a great while, you'll see a platter. It's almost always bowls or jars. A couple of other forms we find canteens and dippers, of course, but bowls and jars primarily, which indicates that their food was primarily stew or gruel or porridge of some kind, very liquid. Now, when they do make, what happens is they'll break a bowl. If they break a bowl, they may carve it down into like these little platters, and they still use these. We often find these out in the hunting areas. You go out where the hunters would go out and stalk the game animals, etc. And I can just picture what happened. They're going out there, they've got their pack, they've got their provisions, they need to take a plate or a bowl or something with them, and I can just hear their wife, you're not taking my good bowl. So she'd give them these large pieces, and they'd grind these down and use a little kind of a field platter. And we find these quite often out in the hunting areas. In fact, you'll find just a big sherd that still has the shape and everything. And you use that as a little field bowl, kind of a paper plate. We find these out in little caches out there where they hid them and kept them when they would be hunting in that area. But when they break pottery, they wouldn't just discard it. They would grind it up to make temper for new pots. They'd make gaming pieces and spindle whorls and different things out of the broken pieces. And the platters are, if anything, they're always the bottom of a bowl that's been broken. They never started from zero and made platters. Very rarely. I think I found one my entire life out here.
made their own toilet seats.
Yeah, these are hatch covers.
Okay.
We jokingly call these toilet seats, but they're not. When you have your rooftop entrance, and you not only have a stone slab that you pull over when you want to go to bed at night, you want to shut your front door, well, you got to leave a hole for the smoke to go out. So they carve these with a hole, but they also put this little gap in here. And this little gap is the little spirit break. That's the little door, the little entranceway, the little passageway between the two worlds. When you shut your front door at night, you don't want to trap a spirit in your house, and you don't want to shut one out that wants in. So the spirits have their own little cat door, so to speak, to get in and out. We see that symbol very frequently on the pottery, and we see it on other things too, little Kiva models and different things. These miniature vessels are fun too, these little tiny ones. You read the literature, a lot of times they'll say those are kids' toys. Well, some of them are, but there are other reasons for this. If you look in your medicine cabinet, you're going to find lots of little bottles and containers. You need small containers for pigments and medicines and things. But another thing they would do with these, when the ladies were making the pottery, they go out to Mother Earth, they go out to the clay mine, and they dig up some new clay to take back to the Pueblo and make the pots out of. Well, when you take something from Mother Earth, you've got to give her something back. So they'd put one of these little miniature pots at the mouth of the clay mine as a little offering to Mother Earth. And we often find these little clay pockets where they were digging the clay out, and there would be all these little miniature vessels set in there as little offerings to Mother Earth. And it's in the mythology, too, of the Pueblo Indians.
I have to ask you about the statue. Did you find that?
Yeah, no, that was a donation. A lot of collectors, a lot of people around the country loan and donate pieces to the museum because this is very secure, and there's a lot of problems nowadays with theft and people getting their homes broken into and things get lost. So a lot of people are bringing things in and they can loan them or donate them. This came from a lady in Texas that had her husband found that years and years ago in a cave, and it's a little Madonna with child. It's a wonderful little piece carved out of a very soft stone.
Spanish?
No, it's prehistoric.
Oh, really?
That is prehistoric. Very wonderful piece. You see the little crystals back there too. We were doing that up in the Pueblo. You can see the little crystals we find all the time. We find lots of these quartz crystals that they made the little rainbows on the wall with. You find a lot of them that were in pouches and worn and handled. I think I hear our bus coming. Got a bunch of kids coming here in a second. Yep, here they come. You ready? Okay, ready to start? Okay, what we're going to do, first of all, is Charlie over here is going to take you up to the site. You're going to hike up there. And along the way, he's going to point out different plants, different things that the Indians use for pigments, for dyes, and to eat. And he's going to show you different things. Yes?
Could we write the names down on our, if we have something to write down?
That'd be a very good idea. That's a good way to remember them. Now, you're going to hike up to the site. When you get to the site, rule number 1,
Don't touch.
don't pick anything up. And rule number 2 is don't pick anything up. So what's rule number 9,473?
Don't pick it up.
Right. And also stay very nicely together, nice and tight together, because there's a lot of activity up there today. And the other thing is when you see walls, you have to stay right on the trail and don't go near the walls because they're very fragile, okay? Let's ask a few questions first, too. What animals did the prehistoric Indians raise in pens and things? Yes?
Dogs?
Dogs. What did they do with the dogs? Went hunting with them. What else did they do with the dogs?
They made hot dogs?
Made hot dogs. They did make hot dogs. They ate them. They ate the dogs. That's right. That's the A answer. We're having dog for lunch. Oh, it's delicious. Your neighbor's dog came down? No, we're not having dog for lunch. What other animal did they raise?
I know. Wolf.
Well, that's kind of a dog. Yeah. Back here.
A
Cats, well, you know, it's funny. We see a lot of pictures of cats in domestic situations, but we don't really find many bones of cats, so we're not sure.
Horse?
Horse came with the Spanish in 1538. Turkeys. Turkeys is the right answer. Turkeys. They raised turkeys. They used the turkeys to make robes from the feathers, and they ate the turkeys, too. There's one other one. They had parrots. They had macaw parrots. Yes?
They raised raccoons.
No, raccoons were here, but they didn't really raise them like to eat and things. What plants did they grow in their gardens?
Tomato plants? Corn?
Corn. Lots of kinds of corn. Popcorn, yellow corn, red corn, colored corn. Tomatoes, yes, probably. They also had beans and squash. Yes.
And fish. And watermelon.
Watermelon. Melons, right. Gourds and melon. They ate fish. They fished. They had traps for the fish.
Corn? No.
Okay.
Corn.
Charlie, are you ready to show them some plants and hike up? Okay.
Yeah.
Restrooms are this way, and then get over here. As soon as you're done, hurry up and go over there with Charlie and we'll get started. Okay.
I can hold it.
You can hold it. Good girl. Okay. The museum, we house everything from the site. Stays here at Ravensite, which is a tremendous advantage. When you're a researcher, you don't have to run down to Tucson to the State Museum and dig through their back rooms and try to find something. It's all kept right here, and it's all housed right here. We had a fellow come in about 2 weeks ago, and he wanted to get prehistoric elk DNA. And I said, no problem. It took about 3 minutes. We went over to the drawer with all the tines and found an elk tine very quickly, and the date's about 1320. And he was off and doing his research. Some of the beans and corn plants and different seeds and things we find from the site, these beans, we found a bowl, and in the bottom of the bowl, we can date the bowl. We know when the bowl was, about 1100, AD 1100. And it had these beans in the bottom, buried, preserved, dry, under the ground, sitting there for 800 years, waiting for sunlight and moisture. Well, I sent most of them down to Native Seed Search down in Tucson, so they preserved the original genetics. But I couldn't resist. I took a few of them and planted them. I felt just like Jack and the Beanstalk, you know, going out there sticking them in the ground. And a great big bean bush grew up. It had flowers on it that looked like orchids. And the beans, great big bean pods. And we tried them fresh and tried them ground and tried them dry. They're the most awful tasting beans you ever had in your life. So we couldn't figure out how to cook them right. But it is one of the prehistoric seed stocks. These vessels below, these very large jars, these have been very poorly dated. We're not really sure what's going on here. These are from the South Pueblo. We find these very, very frequently. In fact, Mike's room has a couple of these coming out right now. We're calling them at the moment Matsaki brown on buff, which should date into the almost into the 16th century. But it looks like they're trying to copy. They're not really a black on white. They're sort of a buff color on almost a yellow. It almost looks like the Indians here were trying to copy the northern Hopi yellow wares. And they start out with a very globular form, and then they start getting the Gila shoulder that you see from down by Payson and Globe in that area, the Salado-looking shoulder. Then they go to this big flying saucer shape. This one's interesting with a hole in it. There's a hole on the... When I first started reconstructing this vessel, I thought that the hole may have been a little drain hole. You know, you have a little wooden plug in there, and you can tilt it, maybe it had hanging. But then I found there's a hole on the other side, so it obviously had a cord through it or something to hang it. To hang this pot. It's a pretty big pot to be hanging too. A lot of cloud symbols on these and house symbols. Cloud house, cloud house. And at first we didn't, we knew what the symbols were. We knew what they were saying, cloud house, in many combinations, but we didn't know what it meant until I was reading in the literature. A fellow named Hodges was out here in this part of the country about 1900, and he interviewed the Hopi up on Second Mesa. And the Hopi back then were not as esoteric as they are today, and they would talk to you a little more. And Hodges interviewed the Hopi, and he asked them to list their main freightal groups. These are the guys who run the kivas, basically. And the second group was called Potki, or House Cloud House clan. And Hodges asked the Potki clan leaders where they came from. And the Potki clan leaders said, well, that's easy. We came from the south and now ruined villages along the upper Little Colorado River. That's right here. And we have now 5 or 6 of their clan vessels, the Potki Cloud House clan vessels. And that Cloud House combination represents that clan. The house is the little square with a dot in it. That's one of the forms of house. That's one of the symbols that means house. There's a couple other ones. Clouds are represented in many ways, usually by a unilateral terrace with a long neck. Well, there's one there. That's a cloud. And there's another one here. You can see it. Unilateral terrace with a long neck is cloud. Of course, if you flip 2 clouds together and interlock them, you make house marriage again. That's sort of man-woman house marriage, nuclear family idea. So a lot of these symbols are coherent. This is the big Tonto bowl we were talking about earlier with the serpent imagery. Right around, late 1300s, early 1400s, the Salado Indians moved up to Ravenside, and they brought with them their religions, and one of them may have been a serpent cult of some kind. We find these giant bowls, giant jars, with serpents painted on the outside, usually 2 serpents. And this bowl has a lot of features we really love. It has a kill hole in the bottom, it has a spirit break on the side, and there's really quite a lot to talk about on this one. Serpent imagery, serpent and bird combinations, you see them a lot. Here's one. There's the bird form with the serpent painted on the side. There's a tremendous amount of information in the mythology about birds and serpents. You're basically talking about Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent from Mesoamerica. These people had trade networks all the way down to Guatemala. They certainly knew the Maya and the Aztec cultures. And the serpent-bird combination, yes, it's Quetzalcoatl, but it's more than that. If you think about our own mythology, our Christian Judeo mythology, and I use that word meaning truth, by the way, mythology is truth, if you look it up. In the Bible, the serpent, what is the serpent? The serpent is the belly crawler, the dust eater, the lowest of animals. Okay. What is the bird? The bird represents flight, freedom, spirituality. This bird-serpent combination basically represents us. We are a flat-footed, knuckle-dragging, mouth-breathing omnivore. We are bound to the earth, but inside us we have the spirit, the soul, that can become godlike if we do everything right and if we behave ourselves. So we have both of those elements in us, the bird and the serpent. And that combination all over the world. And what is our bird and serpent today in our mythology? It's the dragon, basically, the winged worm. It's the same thing in China, India, all over the world. You see it prehistorically here, too. This is a little model of very much what the South Pueblo would have looked like in its heyday. The rooms were laid out in a horseshoe, sort of a square horseshoe layout, so that the people could get up on the rooftops and view the Kachina ceremonies in the plaza. And this was a pretty typical construction architectural layout after about 1350, when the Kachina cult developed in this area. Sort of replaced the old fertility cults that preceded it. And it was very much a planned community. They planned the buildings, they planned the layout. There probably is a kiva, the little circular building in the center. There in the south, we're not sure if that's a kiva. We have a very nice kiva in the North Pueblo, a great big one, and they're still working on that. It will take many years to finish the excavations there. But where Mike was working in the south would have been right over in the left-hand corner there. I think there's 2 more rooms to the east. This layout, this is a little smaller than the Pueblo actually would have been. It would have been a little larger. The room blocks would have been 7 or 8 rooms wide on both sides, and at least 5 deep to the back of the panorama. This was made, a friend of mine works for Spielberg, and he carved this up for me, made the model. He works in the movie industry. Here's our tabletta. This is one, I'll turn a little light on here. This thing's light sensitive, so you have to have the button go off here. This tabletta, this is like a little niche we saw in the Pueblo building. They have these tablettas. They're sandstone, painted with different pigments. It's fortunate that this preserved. This happened to be face down in the room, and it preserved. There's a couple of rain clouds, a rainbow. Of course, the rainbows are the pathways, a highway for the warrior twins or other deities. A little sky serpent. You can think of a sky serpent like lightning, if you like. The T-shaped symbol is the important one, though. That's the little spirit break. It's like a doorway, but think of it as a transcendence doorway. Think of the Jonah story. Jonah, he's kind of ornery and pushy, so they throw him overboard. He gets swallowed by a whale. He's down there in this sort of womb again, dark and wet. And then he spewed out. He's a better person for the experience. He has a transcendence experience. He's a much better missionary after he got swallowed by the whale than before he got swallowed by the whale. So this is a transcendence idea, and that's the little gateway between the one realm and another. Little doorway to the church, if you would. In fact, the kivas in this part of the country are laid out very much like this. That little break or doorway to the kiva is facing to the east. And that's, if you looked at the floor plan, it would look very similar to that symbol. Like I say, we have to keep the light off that for the most part because it's light sensitive. I love this little jar here. This little corrugated jar was found in the room, had a little sandstone lid on top. We opened the lid and all of this material was inside the jar. Now it's not a practical thing to us today. We don't think of it that way, but it's full of prayer sticks. There's an eagle talon, a bear tooth, lots of little fossils and crinoids and different things that the prehistoric Indian thought was interesting. What this is a little shaman's medicine kit. This is the little tool kit for the shaman. You tell the future, you pray with this. And I imagine prehistorically there were other perishable things in there too, like feathers and corn pollen maybe and some other things. The idea of fetishes, and we have the fetishes shown here too, the little animal carvings and recreations, they're thought of like a good luck charm. You carry the little animal fetish, it may be a representation of your totem, your clan, your identity. When you go out, when you become a man, you go out on a vision quest to find the animal that you identify with. And they carry these, and use them in prayer and in deep thought and meditation. And very often the fetish would be tied with a little point on top or some beads or some other adornments. And you have to feed the fetish. You can't just leave it in the bag. You've got to feed a little cornmeal once in a while. And this is a modern fetish bag that the Zunis still use today. Yeah, this was brought in now. I wish we had better provenience on this. But this big stone tablet was brought in by a fellow, and what he does is he maintains the railroad tracks between the power plant out here and another power plant. So this is a local find. And what happened was a rock slide had come down. He was clearing the rock slide off, and he flipped over this tablet. Well, you can't date stone, unfortunately, except for obsidian. But it is drilled with a prehistoric drill. It does have the connular drill holes, and it undoubtedly is authentic. And what it is a sundial. I mean, obviously, you put the center, we've tested it too, and it works. You put the center shadow maker, was it gnomon or gnome, call it, in the center, and it makes a shadow, and there are 4 holes on the outside that mark the equinoxes and solstices. And the thing does work. It does line up. So it is authentic. It has 20 divisions, which does match some of the Mayan calendars. Calendars are not supposed to be this far north, but as soon as you start planting crops, and these people have been planting crops since AD 900, AD 1000, and as soon as you start planting crops, you've got to know when to plant. I mean, to within about 3 weeks in this part of the country. So as soon as you start doing that, you do start paying attention to what day it is, what month it is. And it's not that hard to do. If you get up on your Pueblo roof every morning and look at where the sun comes up over the ridge. Well, it doesn't take too much of a genius to notice that the sun moves north in the summer and south in the winter. And it doesn't take too much of a genius to notice where it stops moving north. Holds there for I think 3 or 4 days, and the shaman's got to run out and do some magic to make it start going south again. But then it goes south to a certain point, and then it comes back. Well, it doesn't take too long to figure out those 2 points in time. To notice that, gee, by that little peak, as soon as it hits that little peak or rock, that's planting time. And then you start figuring out, well, how can I tell what day it is if I'm not on my Pueblo roof? So you start figuring out how to mark this in other ways. And we found very good, though, at the Sundagger site up at Fajada Butte. That is clearly a solar calendar. And here at Casa Malpai and other sites around this area, we have found indicators of how they mark this off. This is a very nice sundial. I wish it were in situ. I wish it were in place, but it isn't, unfortunately. But it does have the divisions and the markings for the equinoxes and solstices. It's the only one I know about this far north. Yeah, these, well, we're talking about this is the first book. This is the symbols on the pots. And this really, I thought this was going to be a lot more controversial than it was, but it wasn't. And in fact, a lot of other researchers were talking about the Patricia crown with the serpents on the Tonto polychromes. I think it made other researchers look at the imagery a little bit more. And I was excited about that, this talking pots. And if any of these aren't in your bookstore, get after them, get them in there. The other one we did is the Treasures of Time, which is the symbols, it's not the symbols, it's the types of pottery and how they change through time. This is really a field guide. If you're out in the Southwest and you're hiking and you find a sherd on the ground, with this book you can date the sherd. You can tell when the site was occupied by the sherd and by the styles on the pottery. This is a little more textbooky. The last one we did is about the petroglyphs of this region. And this was a lot of fun. This came out last fall. And when I started working on this book, I approached it the same way most academics approach things. You try to classify them and measure them and group them together, like with like, etc. And with the petroglyphs, we discovered very quickly that most of these images out here in the Southwest, they're not just random. You'll hike down a canyon and there'll be basalt that's just beautiful to carve glyphs on, and there's no glyphs. But then you round the corner and there'll be a little cave, an eclectic boulder, and there's all the glyphs. That's because the shaman, the medicine man, was doing most of the carving. He would go out, or she would go out to a specific area, create the images to create sympathetic magic, basically what's going on. They'd make an image of something so that it would happen, and they would say their prayers. We kind of do the same thing. We're going to do an interview or a job interview or something. You kind of rehearse it in your head. It's sort of the same thing. But we found that these images were sympathetic magic. They're not graffiti. It's not some bored hunter out there carving just because he's waiting for the game to come by. In fact, you see very little of that. In fact, you see very little of that, and I compare that always to these modern kids that spray paint everything in the cities. They call them taggers. How often have you seen a tagger spray paint at the altar of a church? Very rarely. Very rarely would anybody else mess with the magic. They wouldn't go out and create an image because they don't want to mess with the magic that the shaman was using. This was a lot of fun. They're going to go out on a petroglyph hike, in fact, this afternoon, and we can go along on that maybe.
Great.
Okay, and there's your three.
Great. Appreciate it.
Well, it's nice having you back again.
Thanks for having us.
Well, it's always a
Appreciate
pleasure.
you.